Welcome to podcast number 56. This podcast has a little bit of a backstory to it. This is a podcast that I had on my list, my to-do list for quite a while. And honestly, I kind of erased it off there because I felt that going over motorcycle ergonomics over a podcast was going to be basically impossible. It's like one of those things you kind of have to show people. And then I've had 2 or 3 people write in asking about it in different forums. And I had a person that donated write to me and ask me about ergonomics. When I go through and explain this, part of it is we use some of the bicycle analogies. And this guy's had professional bicycle fits done. And we got talking back and forth about it. And so I ended up making him his own little voice recording for him on motorcycle ergonomics. And then I went through and I went, hey, damn it. Yeah, I can do this. So yeah, you can thank one of the listeners for this podcast. So we'll go through this one, and it's going to be pretty basic. This one doesn't need to be overly complicated, but we're definitely going to give you some basics for ergonomics and some report cards for it as well. It's pretty simple. Why is ergonomics important on a motorcycle? Well, of course, right? Comfort, adjustability, being able to have a higher level of performance because you fit the motorcycle, and it's so hard because everybody has different body shapes and different fitness levels, and fitness level plays a lot into the ergonomics as well when you're track riding, because as soon as you're not able to hold yourself up in kind of an athletic position, then it makes it pretty difficult to move around. So being comfortable on the bike, and of course all these different bikes with all these different things and all these different characteristics of how you fit on them. And I used to love it. In some of the magazines used to have kind of an ergonomic triangle that they would show, and it was able to showcase, oh yeah, that bike puts you closer to the front, or this bike has a different peg height or whatever it is. So yeah, it's very important. And we've all gotten on bikes where it's like, oh my gosh, that bike fits me so well. Why does that bike fit me so well? And why am I not able to replicate that? My talk on ergonomics started off with bicycles. So being I guess used to be a competitive cyclist. I still ride my bicycle a lot. I'm just not competitive anymore. I've gotten a bunch of bike fits. When you get a professional bike fit done for competitive cycling, they put you on your bike, and the first thing that they look at is how you sit on the bike, right? Your seat height, and then your fore and aft placement of your seat. And it's interesting because I'd noticed people riding motorcycles, they get on their bike, they straddle them, and they sort of naturally sit right up against the gas tank, just sitting on your bike in your garage or in the pits or whatever. And then they adjust the bars and levers first, and then they start working to maybe their feet. And then it's the opposite of what we actually want to do. So what we want to be able to do is we're going to set our butt and our placement of our butt, how it sits on the seat, our legs, all those things, and then we'll look at the handlebars and levers and all those things. So we'll go through those basics. So the first thing we'll start off with is, what is our goal doing this? And yeah, I talked about the comfort and adjustability, but street riders, straight line comfort is going to be more paramount than hanging off, in the corners. Of course, it depends on the bike as well. But street riders, yeah, straight line, comfort might be a bigger deal than being more set up for the cornering, right? Being able to be more adjustable with things. Track riders or racers, right? Cornering is what's going to be is what the goal is going to be. We want to be in the optimum position to enter the corner, be at mid corner, and accelerate off the corner. So we're going to look and see how our body position works for that. So that's how we want to set our bike up. Setting it up straight up and down in a pit sort of doesn't work that way. And when we look at ergonomics at a very high level, right? We look at MotoGP, World Superbike, Moto America, and we spend a lot of time working with ergonomics because those guys are trying to be as incredibly precise as they can. MotoGP, all those guys have custom ergonomics. Gas tanks are custom. They're shaped for their body shape, how they want their legs to be. Clip-ons, different angles, lengths. It was a funny story because a crew chief that worked for Yoshimura, when he started riding, doing some training with us, and we started looking at ergonomics for him, he's like, you know what? It's funny. He goes, because I always used to sort of complain, and why do we have all these, sort of custom parts in the truck, right? We had clip-ons, and the clip-ons had a forward. The clip-ons could be placed forward or back in millimeter increments. So the person was super long, then the bars would be placed more forward. And he always used to complain, like, why do we need all these things? And then when he got riding, he's like, oh yeah, now I know why we need these things. So yeah, the ergonomics at the high level becomes a super big deal with, clip-ons that are at a certain angle, or spaced out or spaced in or whatever they may be. We deal a lot with custom seat pans, different pegs, different peg lengths, all these different things to get the rider what they want on the bike to be comfortable on it. So the first thing that we're going to look at as we go through this is how we're sitting on the seat. So we want to look at the fore and aft on how we sit. And when we do that, we need a report card for it. So how do we figure out all these different body shapes and different tank positions and all this stuff? For track riding or racers, what we're looking at is a very good gauge or report card for this is the middle of our thigh. So if you got your bike sitting there on stands and or somebody holding you up or whatever it may be, let you hang off to one side. Your outside thigh, how your outside thigh gets engaged to the gas tank is what our main report card is going to be. And we want our thigh to be engaged with the gas tank at about halfway or maybe slightly before halfway. And again, this takes into consideration everybody's different builds. But you'll find that, of course, a taller person will be off the tank more, a smaller person won't be off the tank as much. But if you use that gauge of middle of the thigh or slightly back, you're off the tank a little bit. Of course, one of the problems that we have, if you've listened to the other 55 podcast, right, is how we sit on the seat, being too close to the gas tank, how it causes problems. So the middle of the thigh is a very, very good gauge for this, and it starts the whole process. Once we have that identified of where we're sitting on the seat, then we can start to look at where our feet are placed. And what we're looking for is we want our feet to be below us. We want to be able to have those foot pegs as leverage. And if they're not underneath of you, it's difficult to build any leverage. If you can kind of draw an imaginary line down from, say, your hips, it's going to be pretty straight in line. They might be slightly behind you because as you lean forward, you're going to maybe want that foot peg placed a little bit behind you. So your feet need to be underneath of you so you can have some leverage on the pegs. Most riders, especially track riders, your foot pegs are too high. They are. So unless you're having, ridiculous scraping problems, which could be a whole bunch of other things, modern motorcycles, very rarely are we scraping pegs on. Yeah, and there's some ones that have pegs that are too low, but there aren't that many of them. And you can go really, really quickly with even stock foot pegs. So they're not holding you back that much, and you can deal with that with how you move on the bike around, how you move around on the bike as well. But the idea is we need those foot pegs below us, right? And they need to have leverage. If the foot peg becomes too high, right, then you lose that leverage with your hip angle. Then the hip angle gets too tight, and you really can't develop anything there. One way that I look at my foot peg height is one of the gauges, is it basically comfortable? Do I feel like I can move from left to right on the seat easily? And then the second thing that I'll look at with foot peg placement is if I'm hanging off, how easy is it to drive my outside thigh into the tank, right? So if I just raise my heel up on my outside foot, if I move it, am I able to get locked into the tank with the outside thigh? So, and if I need to bring the pegs up for that, that's great. Typically, if I have to default, I'll always default to the comfort on the pegs rather than jamming it into my fuel tank because I can adjust for that other ways by tightening up my core. So let's make sure we get the fore and aft going, and then we can start to work on the foot pegs and the foot peg height where they're located. Then from there we can look at the bars. And you want a natural reach to the bars, right? So you don't want your hands to fall. You don't want them to fall necessarily on top of the grip. Maybe they're slightly behind the top of the grip. You certainly don't want them forward. So you want a natural reach. You don't want to have to be reaching for them. You don't want your arms locked, but also you don't want it so they're so back so far that your elbow gets tucked in when you start to hang off. So that's something that you can take a look at as well. So put those bars in an angle when they're spread out, that they're not so wide, they're hard reach, but also not so narrow that they're pinching you when you're hanging off. Because remember, the goal is when you're cornering. And then from there, you can look at your levers. Yeah, the levers need to be a nice natural reach. Again, you shouldn't have to move your hand, reposition your hand to get to your levers. So you shouldn't have to reach up, reach down, do anything with those levers. It should be a natural reach, and you shouldn't have to move anything with the palm of your hand to get to those levers. That's something that I take a look for. One of the things I see people that either their levers are pointed down too far, or people that complain they need a quick turn throttle, you're sitting too close to the gas tank. So got to get you scooted back off the gas tank a little bit. Very rarely, unless you've got some different body shape or different physical need. Typically, that's not really that big of an issue. Matter of fact, I'm thinking I don't even have the bikes that I'm riding right now don't have quick turn throttles on them. So yeah, and they work just fine. So going through that again, right? Let's establish our fore and aft on the seat, right? In our outside thigh. Middle of the thigh, slightly before the middle of the thigh is our report card for there. So seat height and peg location. We're going to look at that next. Then we'll look at the bars, and then we'll look at the levers. Some riders, we look at it, different kind of bikes. Some bikes have a really long gas tank. Some bikes have short gas tanks. And again, some people's body structures are all different. And I've mentioned this before. We build custom seat pans even for some of the riders because they want a certain material. They want to be locked into a position, not necessarily up against the tank, but they don't want to necessarily slide all the way back under acceleration. I mean, there's all sorts of ways. Again, it's getting that ergonomics that they want to make them comfortable when they're cornering is what we're looking for. So what are some of the other report cards for this? Yeah, you should feel that outside thigh starting to get locked into the tank as you turn in. And we've talked about that with some of the body position things. So you should be able to lock as you turn in. Your hips are going to rotate. In other words, your inside shoulder goes back, and your hips will rotate into the corner, not away from the corner. And you should be able to feel that outside thigh. And then you should have the ability to have your hands pretty loose after turn in. That'll be a good report card for you, and that'll really show how that inside foot peg is placed and whether you're able to really put some weight on there to get that weight off that inside arm. So, all right. It ended up being a lot to that one. I was worried that this one was going to be a little bit short, but ended up being a lot of good stuff in there. So, Motorcycle Ergonomics 101. Let's get comfortable with our bikes, and let's put ourselves to be in a position to operate the controls and be more adjustable with everything.
Copyright 2018, Ken Hill Coaching.